Barely Emerging is recorded on the lands of the Kaurna people. We at Haunted Cow Collective acknowledge the Kaurna people and all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the sovereign custodians of this country. We pay our respects to elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Yep, they sniffed each other's asses and they liked it.
Just watching dudes in three-piece suits getting hypnotised by a stopwatch while some guy's in the corner of the room just drinking straight absinthe would have been a fucking hoot and a holler. Welcome to another episode of Barely Emerging. I'm Frances.
And I'm Sid.
Hello, Sid. Do you remember at art school doing a studio journal?
I sure do, Frances.
I used to hate doing a studio journal just because it's not how I would naturally work.
Yep.
Like, for those of you who haven't been to art school, studio journal, it's like a diary of the things that you've been learning or the artists that you've looked up to kind of inform whatever work that you're doing.
Yep.
So in art school, the teacher would just be like, all right, so this week we're looking at Dadaism. So I want you guys to go and look up some facts about Dadaism, look up, you know, some key players in Dadaism and stuff.
Yep.
And I would always do it super last minute.
Profiles on people were always date of birth, date of death. Like where they grew up.
Yeah. And it was just like, I don't know how this is going to help, but I mean, obviously it's good to know your history for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's when you're at a university just being like, Salvador Dali, born.
But also the studio journal was a progress of your work. So also it was a way to be marked and it was a way to see your progress through the subject and how it affects your work.
And, you know, I did just dog it a second ago and say it wasn't how I usually worked, but I do see the benefit of them because it's funny, like when you look back at how a work started versus like what it ended up being, it can be really interesting and it could also form the basis of like other works, like other really interesting works. It's like when I look back through my studio journals now, it's like you can pinpoint where I had like a bit of a breakthrough.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, and you can see like what a work maybe started out its life as being, but then, you know, there'll be things like, oh, all of a sudden I've read this, you know, really great piece of theory by someone and then it's just pivoted the work completely. So it's like all these little like, it's like a timeline of your work almost. And it really does get informed by those little exercises in research that you do.
Yeah, definitely. My inspiration points usually come in the shower.
Oh, of course.
Or doing the dishes.
Mine are at 3 a.m.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, yeah. 3 a.m. Definitely the witching hour.
The witching hour for sure.
Yeah, or the artist hour, I think.
I think it's just the hermit hour, really.
Maybe the hermit hour.
The unhealthy hour.
Yeah, like, the degenerates.
The degenerate hour. Yeah, so at the degenerate hour, I'll have this like random eureka moment. But annoyingly enough, I don't keep a journal next to my bed. And I know that some people do. I know like a lot of, you know, famous artists are always like, particularly surrealists will be like, I had this really great dream. So they will wake up and write down what they can remember as soon as they do it. Yep. That's another kind of studio journal.
Definitely.
There's like the educational studio journal where you are looking shit up,
or
like recording it. And then there's your own research.
Yep. Which I always really enjoyed the recording of my progress and my process. That was always really enjoyable for me. But the artist profiles and the art theory profiles and all that sort of stuff were a lot harder. But what we're doing today is a studio journal on art theories, which one of the movements we're doing today is Surrealism.
So essentially what we're doing is the thing that we didn't find helpful.
Yep.
At uni. We were both like, yeah, like I found studio journals helpful when it was just me kind of ruminating on my own ideas. But, you know, I say that I love art theory.
Oh, me too.
I was about to say, I feel like maybe I'm, you know, in the margins. I feel like it comes a lot more naturally to other artists maybe to record their own thoughts and processes on work. But yeah, I get a lot out of looking at other artists' work and other theories and just kind of stealing bits and pieces from them.
Yes, I do love, I'm just so passionate about art that it's like if I'm not looking at it, then I'm sad.
Yeah. So today's episode is the unhelpful part of a studio journal. So Surrealism in a nutshell is works that really kind of tap into the uncanny.
Yeah.
It's about revolutionizing the human experience by balancing the rational with the irrational. A lot of surrealist artists really drew on their dreams, hallucinations, and automatic drawing, and also automatic writing. At the core of the work is the willingness to challenge imposed views and norms, and it's also a search for freedom.
Which it started in a time of upheaval with 2 wars on either side of it. So it was the reaction to war and also the lead into a war. So there's a lot of revolutionary sort of stuff going on in Surrealism.
Chronologically, it was first kind of, I guess, outlined by a writer, not even an artist.
Yeah.
Andre Breton. So he published the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, so just after the First World War. So as that ended, they started up Surrealism. So the kind of founding fathers of the Surrealist movement, I suppose, were Andre Breton and Max Ernst.
I listened to some of the Surrealist Manifesto today, and it sounded very much like someone who was fed up.
Don't blame them, honestly.
No,
yeah.
don't. But in the way that it was described, it was very much a tantrum. It felt like a tantrum. But yet, no, what I did think while I was listening to it, I was like, maybe my own imposter syndrome isn't that founded, because if this type of thing can start a new art movement, then I've got nothing to worry about.
One that bled into pretty much everything since then.
Yeah.
You know, if you've ever seen anything that was weirdly juxtaposed, I mean, like there was an ad for insurance like going around maybe last year, and it was like a guy in a magpie suit that would just like rock up in places and been like, yeah, you should have gone to this guy. That's surrealism.
Super surrealist.
That's surrealist,
it's permeated into our culture today.
Yeah.
And people are still making surrealist works of art as
yeah,
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're all wonderful. Like
yeah.
I love surrealism. I don't know if that's coming across. I think the term surrealism was coined in 1917 by Guillaume Apollinaire. So he was also a literary, he was a critic.
Yep.
But I think in the advent of the war, there was really this like humans had kind of lived through a bit of a waking nightmare.
Yes.
So, you know, rather than kind of surveying the beauty around them, it was more about like delving a little bit deeper into the human psyche and I suppose at the time like what that unconsciousness was capable of.
Yes.
Which is a little bit freakish, but the manifesto defines surrealism as pure psychic automatism by which one proposes to express, either verbally, in writing, or by any other manner, the real functioning of thought, dictation of thought in the absence of all control exercised by reason, outside of all aesthetic and moral preoccupation. So that's where a lot of the automatic drawing and writing kind of came in.
Yeah, the real focus on the subconscious.
So for those who are maybe not aware, automatic drawing and writing is just when you kind of sit down, you don't have a single thought in your head. You just put pen to paper and then you just let it rip.
Which is harder.
It actually is a lot harder than it sounds. Yeah. The best examples of automatic drawing and writing in everyday life are if you're on the phone to Centrelink and you've been doodling on a pad of paper. You're a surrealist. You're doing automatic writing.
I know that in our life drawing sessions, it was really hard for people to blind contour draw. And that kind of, it feels a little bit closer to automatic drawing. It's not automatic drawing because you are going from reference, but it was really hard for people to look away from their canvas because it had to be perfect. Whereas automatic drawing pulls away from that idea that the painting has to mean anything.
Yes. Yeah. It's really relinquishing the idea of control, which is what I think a lot of surrealist works are underpinning, whether it's like dreamscapes and nightmares or it is that automatic drawing. It's about the relinquishing of reality and your control over that reality.
Yeah, which is kind of separate from Dadaism, where they just wanted to flip the whole table.
Dadaism was a tantrum, for sure.
Yeah. And then Surrealism, they almost brought back the narrative, but it was anti-narrative as well.
Yeah.
Yep. There's also the game, the Grotesque Corpse.
Exquisite Corpse.
Sorry. I love grotesque things. So. Anyway, the Exquisite Corpse, where you'll fold up a piece of paper and you will draw it with another person and you only leave the end of the lines and another person draws on your drawing. And then you fold it out and it's this weird and wonderful depiction of both of your brains.
Yeah. Jake and Dinos Chapman have a wonderful whole series of exquisite corpse. I think they're etchings though.
Yep.
So to get back to automatic writing, it's just when you sit down, you have no preconceived ideas of what you're going to do. You kind of just put pen to paper and let your brain do the rest.
Yep.
So I know Jean Miro did a lot of those kind of works in, I think about like 30s, like early surrealism. So it was kind of defined by those two pillars. You had the unconscious in like the nightmare state or the dream state, I suppose. And then you had the complete unconscious of the automatic writing and drawing.
Yes.
So as well as dreams, nightmares, and the automatic, surrealist artists also drew a lot from like mysticism. So a lot of ancient and indigenous cultures as their kind of way of, I suppose, I'm doing air quotes, imagining alternative realities. All of those words were in air quotes because I think if you're drawing from indigenous culture, you can't say it's imagining an alternative reality if you have little to no scope about what that reality may be.
Exactly.
But overall, the movement had an aspiration towards the liberation of the mind as well as the liberation of artistic expression. So that also means seeking political freedom.
Yes.
So a lot of surrealists were underpinned by anti-fascist movements, which I suppose, you know, given its sandwich between war times would be pretty understandable.
It definitely.
Yeah. So now that we know a little bit about the background of surrealism, let's look at some of the key players in surrealism. So as we said before, surrealism officially began in 1924 with Andre Breton, who started his life as a Dadaist before kind of cementing surrealism as the new movement.
Yep.
But it has its roots as early as 1917, not just with the naming of surrealism, but by the paintings of Giorgio de Chirico. I may be pronouncing that wrong. If I am, sorry, George. He really kind of captured these street locations with a really hallucinatory quality. So a lot of his works, it has, you know, kind of jaunty perspectives, a lot of like shadow work, and they all look just that little bit off.
Yeah. Lots of arches, lots of like arches as in doorway arches.
Yeah, doorway arches. A lot of like figures as well that don't look entirely human.
No, it's almost statuesque.
So he was doing that as early as about 1917. After that, though, he had abandoned that style. But Max Ernst, who was one of the key players in the surrealist movement, was heavily influenced by de Chirico. So as the Dada movement was ending in 1922, so a couple of years before surrealism was officially cemented in the Manifesto, he had moved to Paris and was kind of working in collage. So he was doing a lot of like really weird, like just juxtaposing like random images, like cutting up his old works and stuff.
Yep, very, very Dada.
Very Dada, yeah. But they all had this really like disorientating, just really illogical imagery that really fueled Andre Breton's imagination. And he became more and more fascinated by Sigmund Freud.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay, I guess.
I know, for such a wonderful movement, it's underpinned by Sigmund Freud. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, very quick aside, Sigmund Freud.
Psychoanalyst.
Creepy dude. A lot of his works and theories have been debunked. If you've ever heard the phrase penis envy, that guy.
And the castrated woman.
A lot of dicks and vaginas in his work. The general consensus is that he kind of just wanted to fuck his mom.
And wanted to kill his dad.
Wanted to fuck his mom, wanted to kill his dad. But, you know, say what you will about him, he helped spark a surrealist movement. So not all bad news, I suppose.
Yeah. If we had to have him, then at least we got surrealists out of it.
So we bring up Sigmund Freud because a lot of that, you know, the work of the unconscious and the conscious mind is a lot of Sigmund Freud's work. Like he really kind of introduced, I suppose, that idea of like the ego and the id.
Yes.
And a lot of surrealism comes from the id and the unconscious.
Yeah.
So Breton and Ernst and kind of others that were kind of in the founding stages of surrealism started by experimenting with hypnotism as a means to access their unconscious creativity. So hypnotism as you would think it is, you know, like with a little stopwatch, like going backwards and forwards. And then they tried to get into these weird trance-like states and then paint whatever came out.
Being in their studio or just being a fly on the wall for any of these sessions would have been, for our 2024 eyes, been very...
Just watching dudes in three-piece suits getting hypnotized by a stopwatch while some guy is in the corner of the room just drinking straight absinthe would have been a fucking hoot and a holler. Like, I would love to see that.
And I just can't imagine the stuff that was coming out of their mouths in that state as well. If they were actually hypnotizing each other properly, but even if they weren't, being free.
1923 lingo under hypnosis would have been so fucking funny.
Oh, I think I would have been cringing the whole time.
like drunkenly admitting that you have a crush on someone, and being like, I just think she's a topping girl, shit is so fucking good. Ultimately, they decided those experiments were dangerous. I couldn't find any more information on what was so dangerous.
The absinthe.
It was probably the absinthe.
Yeah.
So in 1923, so again, just before the official advent of Surrealism, painters Jean Meret and André Masson met and became involved with André Breton. So they were also influenced by Freud. And Breton had experimented with automatism in writing to create words with no thought or planning. So remember, André Breton was a writer, not a painter.
Yep.
So by 1924, Meret and Masson began their version, but with pen and ink. So this is where the automatic drawing comes into it. Jean Meret especially has some really great automatic paintings. So after Meret and Masson had begun doing experimentations with automatic writing, in 1925, as a response to automatism, Ernst practiced frottage. So for those of you who don't know what frottage is, you probably have done it before without realizing. It's a really common early art school exercise. It's where you put a bit of paper down on a texture surface, whether that is like a stone or like a tree or like raised bits of writings on a tombstone even.
Yes, we went in uni, we went to the graveyard and did
there you go.
rubbings.
Yeah, it's when you put a bit of paper to, that raised textured surface and you use commonly charcoal and then you rub over the top of it. So you are left with like the imprint of the texture. So he started doing that. And then he adapted that concept to oil painting. So he would spread pigments on canvas and then he would kind of scrape them back a bit. So really kind of pulling away from the realism of the 1800s and before. And then you got the cubist of like the kind of turn of the century. But cubism was still quite considered.
Yes.
Whereas, automatic drawing and frottage, it was anti-considered. It was just really in the moment kind of painting.
Yes.
So Max Ernst's 1927 painting Forest and Dove was used with that technique of just spreading pigments on a canvas and then scraping them back again. So far in the Surrealism Club, we have the founders André Breton and Max Ernst, and then we have Meret and Masson. After that, Yves Tanguy. So he was a writer, but then again, Di Chirico pops his head up again, inspired him to teach himself to paint in 1923. So he did a lot of like infinity dreamscapes with ambiguous figures. Another one was Alberto Giacometti, a sculptor who met Masson in 1928. He was influenced by African and Egyptian art, so a lot of poaching from other cultures in early Surrealism, unfortunately. He combined those with a more dreamlike aesthetic to create like bizarre kind of stylized figures. Then again, we have a Romanian painter, Victor Brauner. So he was introduced to the movement by Tanguy. He was pretty panned by critics, and he was fascinated by the occult, which for the time, even more taboo as it is now, I suppose. An interesting thing about him was he did a painting in 1931 called Self-Portrait with a Plucked Eye, and then he lost his eye in a fight 7 years later.
Wow.
So you can imagine to the surrealist, occulty kind of mindset. That
self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy. That was probably a huge deal.
Yeah.
So we've used all these other people as a stepping stone to get to the big boy. So many people, ourselves included, to be quite honest, when you hear surrealism, you think Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
For better or worse, he is the kind of poster boy of the movement.
Yep, the mustached poster boy.
Yeah, the mustache. Yeah. Even if you don't know much about surrealism, you've probably seen him or his works.
The clocks.
Yeah. He's the melting clock guy. If you don't know him by name, you do now.
Yeah.
He joined the movement in 1928, and in a weird kind of full circle moment, he captured the attention of Sigmund Freud. So Freud preferred his work to any other surrealist, which kind of made him, because he was teacher's pet in that sense. So that's kind of made him the big boy.
Yep, they sniffed each other's asses and they liked it.
So his paintings feature kind of self-torturing psychosexual undertones, which is what Freud characterized as the unconscious manifesting within the conscious world. So that's where a lot of, like psychosexual, that's where a lot of the penis envy kind of comes in. His paintings border on illusion, but they have realistic draftsmanship, which is why I think he's had so much success. Because I think earlier surrealist works were they were like very automatic. They were a little bit like rushed, I suppose. They were not as tightly refined as Dali's work was. Like technically his work is excellent. Yeah. Like very, very impressive works. It's just
the person behind the works.
The person behind the works, and for my money, overrated. Yeah. So his most famous painting was done in 1931. So it's called The Persistence of Memory or The Persistence of Time, depending on which gallery you've seen it in, I suppose. That's the one with the melting clocks in it.
Yep.
So that's kind of, when you go to Wikipedia's Surrealism page, that's probably the icon. I haven't looked, but I'm going to put some money on it's that one.
Yeah, it's that one. Or it's a Rene Magritte.
Oh, yeah. If you go to Wikipedia, chances are the thumbnail is going to be Salvador Dali or Rene Magritte. Rene Magritte, I do love though. I love his work.
Apple faces, love them.
Yeah, so Rene Magritte, apple face guy for sure. I think that's called Son of Man if you want its scientific name.
Yep, scientific name.
He also has the Treachery of Images. So that is the painting of a pipe that says, this is not a pipe underneath it.
Love that one.
Yeah, it was one of the ones where when I first saw it, I was just like, okay, cool, you're just trying to be subversive. But then my art teacher at the time was like, well, no, it's paint. And I was like, oh, fuck, okay.
Yeah.
I see what you've done here.
So many layers to that. And that goes into our titles episode. If you haven't listened to it, have a listen.
But shameless self-plug there, yeah.
Yeah, of course. But this could have been one of the titles episodes because of its title. It just informs the work so much on so many different levels that it's just exciting.
Yeah. So Magritte, again, very successful, and his work it's been one of the more persistently spoken about.
Yeah, definitely.
So, him and Dali are very much kind of like the big players in the Surrealist movement. And I think it is, again, because he also had really refined work in a way. Like his work, it wasn't realistic. Like it still looked like a painting, but at the same time, it was more realistic than other Surrealist works may have been. So it's a little bit easier to kind of, I suppose it's easier to find your way into a work when you can kind of get
something from it.
Yeah, like you can kind of get what's going on. Like there's that wonderful painting that he's done. It's the sky that's like it's raining men in suits. It's raining men in suits with umbrellas. Like they're all fucking falling down like Mary Poppins, but like that's the rain.
It's the
original It's Raining Men. It's so good.
Yeah. And it's the humor within the uncanny that he unlocks. Like that's something with the apple face guy as well, where you just see this suited man with an apple in front of his face. It's just it's completely like bonkers, but it's a refined bonkers, I think, with his.
So far, Surrealism has probably sounded like a bit of a boys' club.
It definitely is.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it is from, the founding because of the time period. But there was some pretty dope women painters.
Oh, I went into quite a rabbit hole because whenever I look into art theory, I always go, what were the women doing? So I definitely had a lot of women of the Surrealist movement, and it was really hard for them to... It wasn't as hard as other movements from previous eras and to get in, because there was an aspect of Surrealism that did allow for women to come in, but within reason, air quote, because there was the aspect of women being the muse that was still within Surrealism that a lot of the women Surrealist artists wanted to pull away from, but the male Surrealist artists definitely still did. So one of the comparisons would be Salvador Dali's lip couch, and Oppenheim's chicken feet table. Yeah. So you can see the difference between there, where Salvador Dali is looking at the desirable aspects of femininity, where men will actually literally sit on their lips. Yeah. And Oppenheim was looking at just this real real objection of a body, like, and of women's body as well. Like, I love the chicken feed table. I don't know if it's the chicken feed table. I'm calling it the chicken feed table, but it's like bird legs and then just this round table, and it's got some bird feet prints on the top of it. And it is fantastic because it looks like just this stork standing up, and you can almost feel the hands on the hips when you look at it. It's great.
She also did the fur teacup. The fur teacup is one of the things that when we learnt about surrealism at uni, it was the fur teacup. You know?
Yeah.
It
Very
was like
exciting work.
Yeah, it was like, here is a great example of both surrealist and abject work. Because the thought about putting that furry teacup to your lips is horrendous.
So the story behind the fur teacup, she was at lunch with Picasso and Dora Maar, and Picasso had commented on her bracelet, which was fur covered. And he said, anything can be fur covered today. And she said, even this cup and saucer. And that's where it came from. She ended up making that cup and saucer lined with fur.
Yeah, so she officially made Object in 1936, and it's still brought up as it should be because it's a fantastic work.
Yeah.
Several women also came to the movement through Max Ernst, kind of unfortunately.
He liked women and he liked to date them, have sex with them, and then bring them into the art movement.
Yeah, he kind of recruited them in a weird kind of pimpish way, which was a bit gross.
Yeah.
So Leonora Carrington, she was wonderful, I think quite overlooked in surrealism as well. She officially joined the French surrealist movement in 1937. She ended up in Mexico in 42 because she had to flee, I think, as most people who were anti-fascist at the time did.
Yep.
But she brought together those occult ideas with like personal history as well. So that's another example of like, you know, taking these, for the time, quite left of field influences and kind of merging them together. She has a wonderful painting called Self-Portrait, or in parentheses, The White Horse Inn in 1937.
Yes.
Which was a wonderful one.
That's the one with the white horse outside of the window and then the rocking horse at the top, and she has white pants on. Oh, yes, and she's got the hyena, that's right. And she actually said that she is like a hyena as well.
So Ernst's fourth wife as well was American painter Dorothea Tanning.
Tanning. Oh, my God. Sorry, keep going. I love Dorothea Tanning.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yep.
So she was an illustrator. So she was inspired to surrealism after seeing a show at the MoMA in New York. Would you like to talk a bit about Dorothea Tanning? You had such an explosion of excitement when I mentioned her name.
I saw it next on the list. Oh my God, I love it. So Dorothea Tanning, she's been called the last surrealist because she died at 101 years old. So she died
she had a good run.
In 2012.
Oh, damn. Okay.
So she was called the last surrealist because she was the last of them that died.
So yeah, Dorothea Tanning, I didn't realize it was actually her that painted Incline and Knack Music.
Yes.
The creepy sunflower woman-child hybrid like hallway.
Yeah.
I love that one. I didn't realize it was her until we pulled it up, which is a little bit sad on my part, actually. So another woman artist that is commonly kind of lumped in with the surrealist was Frida Kahlo, but she, in her lifetime, rejected that. She just said, I paint what I know, which is myself. So we're tacking her in here because depending on your thought, she could be included in surrealism. I think from a contemporary lens, she kind of is. But out of respect for her, we don't really see her that way.
No.
So surrealism, it had its footing in literary. You know, it was a writer's movement first, then it became a visual art movement, predominantly in painting, because painting at the time was probably, you know, the quickest and easiest way to do a lot of those like nightmare dreamscapes and the automatic writing and stuff. There was a lot of great like surrealist photography. I know we need to kind of shout out like Man Ray. He did some really great ones as well. He specialized in like rayographs. It was his variation of a photogram. So they are when you expose photographic paper with objects placed on it. Maurice Tabard as well, a French photographer. He was kind of brought into the movement by Magritte and Man Ray. He did a lot of like double exposure and solarization.
And I do know also, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but Remedios Varo. She did a lot of self-portrait photography of herself.
Remedios,
sorry.
Remedios Varo, yeah. Another German photographer, Hans Bellmer, he used a lot of like handmade life-size female dolls as his subjects too, which
Yes.
Has some pretty cool results, I will admit.
Yeah.
Dora Maar as well, who was unfortunately overshadowed by her affair with Pablo Picasso, but she took a lot of portraits of the surrealists as well.
Yeah.
There is also a lot of like surrealist films. So one that we looked at university was Un Chien Andalou, which was Louis Buñuel's collaboration with Salvador Dali.
Yep.
I think it was in 1929. If you haven't seen the film, you might have seen clips from it or stills from it. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but for those who know, the eye scene.
Very unsettling.
I'll just say the eyeball and leave it at that.
And I hope that that's a trigger warning enough of me going,
The first surrealist film was The Seashell and the Clergyman, which is in 1928 by Germaine Dulac, which has a screenplay by Antonin Artaud, who's another great surrealist writer as well. So yeah, even like surrealism, it had its footing and it had its inception in, like 1917-ish, if you want to kind of place it at that, like cemented in 1924. But it stood the test of time, I think
really did, yeah.
People just like weird shit.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to. Like if I was going to put surrealism in a nutshell, aside from Dreamscape's Unconscious, it's just weird shit.
Yeah.
Surrealism is just all about weird shit and people love that. People need that.
There was one thing that surrealists really loved was the cinema and being involved in the cinema, like sitting in the cinema and being in this room that could be a dream or you could be outside of yourself and you're looking at something. So that's something to note as well, that this surrealism really had its claws in so many different aspects of life and art.
Yeah. Like in 1945, Dali was hired by Hitchcock to create a surrealist dream sequence in Spellbound. Some more like recent examples of directors especially. Chilean director Alejandro Jodorowsky. He's a fucking great one.
Yeah.
And my favorite, David Lynch.
Yeah.
David Lynch has some incredible paintings.
Actually, my microphone right now is on Francis's David Lynch book.
Yeah, my table is slightly too short. So every recording session that you hear, Sidel is being propped up with David Lynch.
Sometimes I have a little bit of a flip through.
Which is just fantastic.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the bare bones of surrealism.
I'm sure we can do a part 2 on surrealism because
there's so much to go into.
There is so much to go into and this is kind of a little bit of a taste tester.
Yes. We would love to go into some more, detail about specific artists, especially some of the films and photography, because we went through a lot of like painters today.
Yep.
But yeah, so we hope you have had fun listening to this little studio journal. We had fun revisiting ours.
Au revoir.
Catch you on the flippity dip.
Slip dip. I have to go.
You have been listening to Barely Emerging, a podcast by Haunted Cow Collective. You can find us on Instagram at Haunted Cow Collective, look for the spooky cow, or follow along at Barely Emerging for updates on new episodes and behind the scenes. You can also visit us at hauntedcow.com.au. This podcast is made by emerging artists for emerging artists, and together we are Barely Emerging.